Thank you, everyone, for joining us here at the Arizona Daily Star Opinion Reader Chat that we're doing a special edition of today because we have a Tucson City Council Ward 3 Democratic primary that we're going to speak with the two candidates, Mr. Juan Padre and Mr. Kevin Dahl. We're here with the Arizona Daily Star Editorial Board. That's me, Sarah Garrett-Gasson, as opinion editor, John DiRolando as the Star's president and publisher, and our top newsroom leader, Jill Jordan Spitz. And we have Sarah Brown, our opinion coordinator, who's going to kind of be in charge of all the muting and the calling on people and all of that. So Sarah, would you explain about the raising your hand and the chat feature?
Yes, so we encourage you to use the chat feature. You can send messages either directly to Sarah or myself, and we'll make sure and ask those questions to the candidate. Or you're also welcome to raise your virtual hand. And to do that, it really depends on what kind of device you're on. If you're on a PC, more than likely you're going to click the reactions button on the bottom of your screen and then click raise hand. That way we'll be able to see you and call on you. Otherwise, if you're on an Apple device, many times it's the three little dots that you'll click that say more. Click on that, click your name, and click raise hand.
Thank you. So we're going to keep everyone muted to keep background noise, except for our candidates and those of us asking questions. So the way it's going to work is I have some questions. Our editorial board has some questions. We're going to open it up for your questions as well. It's best if you put those in the chat so we can pose them. I can kind of keep monitor of everything and pose them to the candidates as we go along. And the Arizona Daily Star editorial board will be making an endorsement. We usually do endorsements in general elections and in the primary if the race will pretty much be decided at that point. So that's why we're endorsing and having this conversation today with Ward 3. Ward 6, for those of you who just cannot get enough of Tucson City Council interviews, we'll be doing that Friday at 11, same sort of Zoom. So what we'll do is give each of the candidate, both of the candidates, a couple minutes to do a short introduction and your two top priorities. I'm not going to do a timer, but I am going to keep track of the time. So it's going to be, a couple, 2 minutes is what I'm aiming for. So when you see me go like this, that means time to wrap things up. So Juan Padres, why don't you go ahead and start us off?
Thank you very much. Muchas gracias. Muy buenas tardes, Tucson. Good afternoon, Tucson. It's a beautiful day, a cooler day. It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you to the Arizona Daily Star for hosting and facilitating this forum. It's excellent. Thank you very much. And of course, a special thanks, like always, to Mr. Kevin Dahl for being present and making himself available for this. Thank you, Kevin. Again, my name is Juan Francisco Padres. I'm a native of Nogales, Sonora. I came to Tucson in 1999 to study at the University of Arizona, where I earned my Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and later my Master's of Business Administration from the Elder College. I'm an entrepreneur by career and heart. I've owned multiple companies, everything from an insurance agency to a restaurant, to a bar, to a trucking company. And currently I do imports and exports for craft wine, beer, and spirits, specifically from Mexico into Tucson and vice versa. I've also worked in the private sector for JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo. Worked for the city of Tucson as an economic development and international trade specialist for 6 years under 3 different city managers. And most recently worked for the autonomous trucking company Too Simple, where I served as their public affairs and business development manager. I've been a resident of Ward 3 on and off. I was recently looking at that. Almost all the time I've been here in Tucson. In fact, I would say about 15 years going back and forth between different parts of the city. So I'm very, very familiar with the ward. In reference to top priorities, my platform on running for office is on mitigating poverty. I do believe that poverty is Tucson's biggest issue, and my platform is based on in part on a way to mitigate it through economic development, affordable housing, transportation, and public safety. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Dahl, please go ahead.
I'm a lifelong Democrat. My wife and I have lived in our home in the ward for 38 years. Our son, Brian Dahl, lives with us, and some of you may know him as hashtag the guy who dances on Congress. He also has a job at as a groundskeeper for a school. My wife is a retired special education teacher, and for the last 8 years, she's been president of our neighborhood association. Our roots are deep here. I'm running on 2 issues. Climate change is one, very important to me. It's a game changer. Poverty is an important issue in our ward, where 1 out of 4 families live at below the federal poverty level. But it's going to get worse with climate change, and there's things that we can do, and we should do them right now. I come to this after a long career in conservation. I was executive director of Native Seed Search. I was executive director of Tucson Audubon Society. And for the past 10 years, I've worked for a national group protecting national parks like Saguaro and Grand Canyon. My second most important issue, though all the neighborhood issues are important too, but is water. Water is essential to living here in the desert. Its quality, its affordability, despite it falling from the sky in great amounts like last night, we're not managing rainwater, stormwater very well. Lots of water ran off in my neighborhood, and that's a resource. You know, there's a need to do a lot more water harvesting and use that to grow the 1 million trees that we need. We need to turn something that's a problem into a benefit. Our major supply of water comes from the Colorado River, and we know from great articles in the Arizona Daily Star that drought, the continued drought throughout the Southwest and climate change is going to impact that sources. Our backup is underground water in the aquifer, and we know from, again, articles in the Arizona Daily Star that there are areas where we're mismanaging that with the recent discovery of PFAs in poisonous amounts in some parts of our aquifer. So those are the 2 issues. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Juan, for appearing on this with me. I'm looking forward to talking with all of you and answering questions.
Great, thank you so much. You both have mentioned, Kevin, coming off of your point about water, I'm curious how you would have voted and why with the recent, what was the water issue right before the Tucson City Council in terms of increasing water rates for people in the county. I'm wondering where you would have come down on that decision and your thoughts behind that. And Kevin, why don't we go first?
Well, my opinion is a matter of public record because you published a letter to the editor that I wrote on that. And I also testified before the city council. It's pretty standard practice for a city that runs a water operation, that supplying water outside of its boundary, those customers need to pay more, a differential rate. And it's standard through most of the cities in Arizona that have that situation. In addition, you know, supplying water outside of the city boundaries is a way that unfortunately spurs sprawl and extra growth. And I don't think this Tucson City Water Department should be an agent of additional growth at the outside of the city, where services that Tucson supplies to those folks are available without them paying Tucson city taxes. So I thought it was a matter of fairness and a matter of good policy. And I would have voted much like the unanimous decision of the city council to implement differential water rates.
Thank you. Mr. Padres.
Thank you. I also agree. I think the differential water rate is appropriate. However, I wouldn't like to see it go over 5 to 10%. I think I think we should recover any costs associated with providing water outside of city limits. But I do believe that it could hurt many older folks or poor people who are on fixed incomes by increasing those water rates outside of Tucson city limits. I think we're all one community, to be honest. I don't think Tucsonans see themselves as like, oh, you're north of river, you're not in the city, or things of that nature. I would have done something a little bit different if trying to conserve water and sprawl is the goal. I would have raised rates flat across the board for people or entities that consume water in a much higher capacity, i.e. hotels or different types of golf courses or people who have pools or use a lot of water. I would have gone that direction to try to conserve in the city of Tucson as well. So I'm just raising the rate at more than 10% for people outside of city limits, I think could backfire on those who are the neediest, in my opinion.
Would you, I mean, my understanding of water rates is that, the more you use, the more you are charged. Is there something different within that structure that you would have advocated?
Yes,
for?
I would have raised the more you use. So people in that second or third tier would have seen an increment as opposed to just the regular user or the low volume user. So if you hit that third tier, you would have seen an increment of 15-20% per se.
Okay. Thank you for the clarification. We have a question from the chat. What are the candidates' opinions of increasing frequency of Suntram buses on the weekend from 1 hour to every half hour? Some are every half hour, but not all of them. This is from a person the bus is their only transportation. And there's a second question that we'll get to later. So, Mr. Padres, why don't you take that? Buses.
Yes, thank you. I think that's definitely worth looking at. I know a lot of people who do work on the weekends, Saturdays and Sundays, so it is an issue. And our bus system as it is, it's already relatively slow to get from point A to point B, especially if there's a transfer in there. So now maybe there's not the volume that would require a bus, but I think we can play with maybe a smaller unit that has that frequency on the weekends, maybe a van or a smaller bus that services every half an hour. I don't see why that isn't already being done, or why is that not a possibility without having to use a full-blown bus for those specific routes. But I would be in favor, absolutely.
What happens if the bus is too small the bus holds 15 people and there's 20 people waiting at the bus stop?
I think you would do the analysis based on prior ridership on the weekends. So if there's only a bus that's coming every hour on the weekend, it means that there's not a demand for that, I would assume. So I think those numbers would be based on ridership on a Saturday and Sunday. That being said, if the demand is there, absolutely, why not use a full-blown bus? I was assuming that the bus frequency on the weekends is less because there's less demand.
Thank you. Mr. Dahl.
I totally support increasing weekend bus stops from an hour to half an hour. And I'm not sure that we have to investigate smaller buses. The differential in cost between a large bus and a small bus is in the purchase of the bus, and that's kind of a fixed cost for the system. It's really labor, and so that will be the cost. I think public transit we need to support whenever we can. It's how people get to school, how folks who can't afford car and car insurance get to the workplace. We need to to enter the 21st century and make it as convenient and functional as possible, we need to find the resources to do that. In addition, public transit takes cars off the road. So for those of us who are driving, it makes it easier for us and avoids future investment in widening streets, which have caused all sorts of problems. Thank you.
Thank you. We have a follow. The second part of that question was, what are your positions on the e-scooters? I know that that was sort of, controversial when it started. You see them all around, but you see them literally all around. So I'm wondering if what your thoughts are about how the e-scooter program is going. Would you change it? And Mr. Dahl, let's start with you.
Well, scooters are another option for transportation, so I'm not sure that they should be eliminated. If they're causing problems, we should deal with the problems. In our ward, they're not very frequent except for those precincts that are close to the university. It seems to me that it was an experiment and a pilot project, and I haven't seen a report or any public involvement with an analysis of how successful it's been. I assume it's making money for the companies, which is great. But it is a form of transportation, and for those healthy and have good balance, to use it to get from point A to point B makes sense. And again, it keeps cars off the road.
Mr. Powders?
Yes, thank you. I'd actually like to add one final part to the other question about the buses. Using vans and smaller vehicles would not require drivers with a commercial driver's license. So it is a lot easier to staff those. And secondly, they're more environmental friendly than the full-blown bus. That being said, I do agree with Mr. Dahl on the scooters. It's not a big issue in Ward 3. You seldom see them. However, I would defer to colleagues at the council as to if there are benefits to their ward and to the residents who are really using it in that area. I do believe if the consensus is there, I would support it.
Okay. Let's see, here is a message or a question. Given opposition to the concept of climate change among some Tucson voters, how do you try to implement your climate change policies at a city level? And then how do you get buy-in from the Republican majorities in the governor's office and the state legislature? And I think Mr. Padres, you're up first.
Sure. I think the city council right now, the mayor has a very robust and is leading the charge on a very robust climate action plan. I think the city of Tucson is the leader, and we should take the leadership without having to wait for the state legislature or the governor's office to approve or not. I think there's a lot of things we can do as a local municipality, leading by example with electric vehicles, hybrid vehicles, changing our buildings to solar, and possibly even creating our own energy. I've mentioned this in prior forums. There is a possibility we could bond to create solar farms and store that energy for our own community. So I don't think we need to wait for either the federal government, which I do believe that the Biden administration is going to be very favorable towards climate action. But I don't think we need to wait for either the Republicans or the state legislature to act. I think we can take that leadership in our own practices in Tucson.
Where would you put the solar farm within the city limits?
That's just an idea at this point, but if we have anything, we have space, and we have we have a lot of open space in the surrounding areas. I haven't really done research as to how it would look like. I've researched it through other municipalities doing it across the country, but I would defer to, at that point, to what would make the most sense at that given time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Dahl.
This is one issue where we don't need the Republicans and the people who have some sort of crazy idea that climate change isn't happening or that we can't affect it. I've been going door to door in this campaign and putting forth my platform that climate change is the most important thing to me. And that's resonating with a lot of people. I'm getting a lot of good response. The city has purview in many areas to work on things locally that will help us mitigate and adapt to climate change. We can do water harvesting, building codes that require items that better insulation. We can do retrofit projects on existing homes and buildings. We need to get solar, not so much in farms. I think more incentives, we have some to get them on every single house and over every single parking lot in town. I don't think we need to have an industrialized central form for solar energy. For a year, I've had solar energy on my house, paying practically nothing for electricity. And when we're potentially facing blackouts because of California, I'm a producer. So there's lots of things we can do. I think the time of the deniers is going away, and they get more press than they deserve because people want to see both sides of an issue. And if 1% doesn't believe in climate change and 99% of the scientists are concerned and upset about climate change, you still see both sides. So we don't need the Republicans. Let's get cracking. People will support it.
How would you, the idea of retrofitting houses, putting solar on, so many of the energy inefficient homes that were built as Tucson expanded, how would you pay for that?
Well, let's look. I assume I'm the first one.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Okay. Let's look for all forms of investment for that, public, private. I am fortunate in that I could invest in the solar energy on my home. First-time homeowners don't have the ability to do that, perhaps, but there are companies that will work with them and put the capital investment in to do that. And their investment is paid off over time with the savings from the electrical bill. So there's creative mechanisms. The city can partner with lenders to provide loans. There can be work programs, people as part of work training to learn how to insulate buildings and homes. Churches should be involved. This is a global crisis. There's no time to kind of futz around. We're a creative country, and we're a city that's full of compassion, and we can do this stuff. Thanks.
Thanks, Mr. Padres.
On the paying side, I think we can bond for that. If the residents of the city of Tucson are interested in a solar farm, in harvesting energy from the sun and storing it and using it for our own community, I think it's something that can be bonded, and there is the revenue to pay for those bonds. And the city has the authority to issue those types of bonds, backed, of course, by the city of Tucson. So that is how other municipalities are doing it across the country.
And you're saying not just for the big projects that you were speaking of before, but for individual retrofits, those sort of things.
No, I don't think we should. Personally, I think going on an individual retrofit is too complicated. Not everybody is able to even accommodate. I think it gets a lot more complicated than just saying everybody gets one. I think solar farm would be a much easier way and easier to facilitate, since it wouldn't be done on private property would be done on probably public land owned by the city of Tucson or purchased.
Okay. So this is a question that that comes from Jill Jordan Spitz, and it is, what is your top specific issue in central to Ward 3? Because yes, city council elected citywide, but you do represent Ward 3. What are one or two top specific issues in your ward? And Mr. Padres, you're up first.
I think the top issue in Ward 3 is poverty. We are the poorest ward, has the lowest home ownership rate, has the highest crime rate, and that would be my second one. It's crime. Poverty and crime are abundant, unfortunately, in Ward 3. So my focus would be to tackle those two issues straight on day one. We have, if you read, and obviously you guys publish it, the amount of shootings, burglaries that are happening in this Midtown area, it is really detrimental to our quality of life, and it needs to be addressed. And it is a derivative of poverty to an extent. So those are my two priorities for Ward 3.
Do you have specific ideas on how to fix those?
Absolutely. Thank you for asking that.
Just
It would be through obviously economic development, but that's a very broad statement. And I think we need to attract investment into the ward. There's a lot of deactivated or deteriorating properties within the ward, whether it's old commercial plazas or even homes. I think those can really be reactivated with the proper investment to bring in mixed use development where you can do housing and commercial. We can really do the rezoning on that to make it attractive for companies or individuals to purchase it and rebuild in many cases. So that's one, and that brings the jobs. But you cannot have jobs without the workforce. So we need to be able to house our workforce in Ward 3. So affordable housing is a big deal. So we need to make sure we have the resources and the housing to house our workforce in Ward 3. And that takes us to transportation. People need to be able to go to their jobs that we bring towards CETO. So we need to really focus on a more efficient way of transporting our workforce from their homes from point A to point B. And lastly, of course, through public safety. You're not going to have businesses or investors or companies or even new residents come into a ward that is plagued by crime. It just won't happen. People look for safety. As a father of two children, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, that is paramount for me. So I think it's a 4-pronged approach to really make that happen.
thank you. Mr. Dahl.
Well, it's true that our ward has a great amount of poverty. And if you drive around the ward, you'll see substandard housing. There's a lot of trailer parks. There's a lot of rundown small apartments. There's a lot of people on the street who at times look like they're up to no good. I'm not sure that these are unique to Ward 3, but they are important to the people in Ward 3. And depending on where you live in Ward 3, there are issues that are very unique to you, whether that's a homeless campment next door that's causing problems. While you feel compassionate about people who are currently houseless, it's causing a lot of problems for your neighborhood. But let's talk about poverty. It's systemic in this country, and there's not one solution. There's going to be a package of solutions. There's an innovative program in our ward, Thrive in the 05, representing the zip code 85705, that started to engage residents and other agencies in doing things to provide the sort of affordable housing and other programs we need to lift ourselves out of poverty. There's another innovative anti-poverty effort from the faith-based community for Tucson that's doing a pilot project in the Amphi district. They're working with the premise that generational poverty can be broken if we can do 3 things for teenagers. One is make sure that they get a high school diploma. 2, that everybody at that point can have a full-time job. And it's best if they don't have children until they're 21, and then people who are married having children do better economically. So I think we need to have everybody at the table dealing with this issue of poverty. It's gone on way too long. There's some more creative ideas out there. Businesses will definitely be part of it. Police will be part of it, their understanding of what's happening in the ward. And we'll see that it's connected to many issues, including mine, climate change. Climate change will make everything worse. People can't afford their utility bills now. When things get hotter, they're not going to be able to stay in their trailer park. They'll need to go look for a cooling center or a community pool that may or may not be open. So we need to deal with this systemically because it is a systemic problem.
You both mentioned public safety and crime, and we have a question. Do you support defunding the Tucson Police Department? And I would like to add on that, or would you change what priorities are funded within, which is what some people mean when they say defund the police? Would you change how the funding for the TPD, or how the funds that they do receive are deployed in terms of response and having other professionals, such as an idea, such as social workers with responding to 911 calls? And I think, Kevin, you are first.
Yeah. Well, like everybody, I'm outraged by the police violence across the country that occurs in greater degree to people of color, African Americans, Native Americans, Hispanic folks, and that needs to change. It's part of the systemic racism that's baked into our institutions, and we need to strike at the roots. Also, as a white person, I have a different interactions with police than other people might have. I feel safe calling 911, and I want everyone to feel safe calling for help from professionals. I agree that we need more programs with social workers, and TPD has started to do that. They have one unit, and I would be in support of more units like that. They're working on a co-responding model where, you know, in the Venn diagram of sorts of incidences that might be responded to, you have ones that might not need a policeman and ones that might turn into violence where you need a policeman. And there's a bunch in the middle. And you don't know going to that incident what it's going to be. So if you can co-respond with a commissioned officer and a social worker, then your ability to deal with those situations is much greater. I've been on a ride along in the West District, and I've met with the police, the Tucson Police Officers Association, the bargaining unit for TPD, the Tucson Police Department, to investigate this stuff. I want to know more. And I am convinced that they're on the right path, that they take reform seriously, and that some of the things that I think all of us would want to see, you know, a more diverse police force, greater response rate, are things that they want as well. We need to put some money into these reforms, and it's going to take money and determination. And as a city council person, I would be working closely with everybody concerned about police and with the police to make sure the goal is that we're safe, that we feel safe in our homes, that our businesses can operate safely, and that crime is reduced. Thanks.
Thanks. Mr. Padres, defunding the police or changing priorities?
Of course, I do believe we in fact, we need to continue to fund the police and then some to address the public safety concern in Ward 3. If you talk to the different officers on patrol in Ward 3, they many times they complain that there's a lack of staffing, and some of the slower response times are due to that. So I do believe we need to recruit additional officers. We need to fund that department for them to be able to do it in an efficient manner, and raise wages to be competitive with other departments in our metro area, which from what I understand pay quite a bit. I would like to see a more diverse police force. I think we can use those funds to really do outreach to communities of color in our community, where we can attract those officers, which in my opinion, a police officer of color patrolling a community that is looks more like them, for lack of a better word, is much more efficient. People feel more comfortable talking to a Hispanic individual, to a Hispanic officer. Maybe they need to communicate in Spanish. So I would really focus on resources, second language, cultural training, which is much needed. I think we have a very progressive police department. I think we have one of the best in the country. Chief Magnus did a phenomenal job. It's unfortunate that we are losing him. Nevertheless, I think this is an opportunity to hire a new chief that will reflect the values of our community, to be able to have a very safe and a very communicative police department. What I want to see is community policing, where neighbors know who their officer is and have their cell phone in case they see something that's not right. I think that's missing in Tucson because of lack of resources. So yes, funding is very important, and I would be a big supporter of it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. A question I have that has also shown up in the chat is about the RTA, the Regional Transportation Authority. We're hearing a lot about, we're on the kind of the cusp of getting ready to decide as a region, do we continue with how the Regional Transportation Authority has been set up, where every municipality gets an equal vote on the board in terms of what transportation projects are funded by the RTA sales tax? And there's been pushback from some within Tucson city government saying that Tucson is not adequately represented on the board, given the large size of revenue, people, geography within Pima County. And so there's some discussion about should Tucson even continue and push for a second round of the RTA. I'm curious what your thoughts are. And I think, Mr. Padres, you go first.
Sorry, my little one is.
Oh, do you want to go?
Yeah, no, no, we have a new puppy and she just got bit by the puppy. Anyway, sorry about that.
Would you like Mr. Dahl to go? So you can.
No, I can manage. RTA. I'm a proponent of the RTA. I think high tide raises all ships, and I like to say, Tucson, we're all a big community, and as I mentioned before, I don't think people really pay attention if they're in Tucson, in unincorporated Pima County, Oro Valley, or Marana. I think people just want to get from point A to point B in a safe and efficient manner. And so I think the RTA has done a good job with that. That being said, I think there's room for improvement. And I think this is the time for us as a community to address it, whether it's the voting, weighted voting. I do, however, and I think we can do a hybrid of weighted voting where you need more than one jurisdiction to approve a project. But I would really like to see road repair. I don't think we need additional roads for sprawl that take us to nowhere. I think we need to really focus on what's been built and make it better, not just on the pavement side, but maybe going through optics, having the right connectivity for high-speed internet for the way of the future. So I would really like to see in the next RTA, which I do believe should happen, more investment in our current infrastructure. And yes, I think we can re-examine the weighted voting to put down those concerns of those who think that Tucson is unfairly represented. I think there is a case to be made that I don't think the city of Tucson, the city of South Tucson should have the same vote per se. But I think there is an opportunity for work on that. Thank you.
If it came down to it and the board, and this will be a question for you too, Mr. Dahl, if it came down to it and said, and the board, the people involved were like, it's either we're all equal as we are now, that, you know, saying no, there won't be any weighted voting. Is that a line you would not cross, and should Tucson withdraw from the participation at that point? Or do you think if it's not weighted voting, that Tucson should proceed?
Well, let me ask you, do we get the road repair?
Well, in my fantasy world, yes. But
yeah, so if we were to get, I think that's.
But no, I think the bigger question is this the representation on the board? Is that kind of the hill to plant your flag on?
Yes, but I think I would love to answer a yes, no on this one, but I think it would depend on other factors. Would I accept a single vote? Possibly, if other things align. As it is, no, but I would like to see other things. I may be flexible with that, assuming that road repair, infrastructure, fiber optics are included. Sure, why not? But just a simple renewal of what we have, no.
Okay. All right, Mr. Dahl.
Well, I'll answer your last question first. A strong yes to let's fall on our swords on weighted voting or some change. It's just not fair. Tucson is the tax base for the whole county, and we're talking about taxes to pay off a bond. We're also the voter base for if we do another transportation bond, which we probably should do. Could we go it alone? Yeah, we probably could. One of the most often comments I get when I'm knocking on a door when I ask, what issues do you want me to know about that concerns you about the city? And they point and they point to their road. You know, this is actually an example of great equity. It's in the poor neighborhoods, it's in the rich neighborhoods. Roads are crumbling and not getting remade. You know, we can get a pothole patched, but in some neighborhoods, it's just a bunch of potholes, patches, and it's not great to drive along. We live in the 21st century. Let's have a 21st century transportation plan that's not about moving vehicles, it's about moving people and making sure people get to where they need to go or get to what they need. And Mr. Padres, you know, is great to point out that maybe we need high-speed internet, that many of us have learned to work at home and we don't have to commute every day as we go forward. We need to have a package that's not heavy in road widening. You know, we're at the tail end of this and we suffered along Broadway. We suffered along Grant. They made promises and we have to fight for the promises that we were once given. I'm concerned about the last RTA project that's going to be in our ward along First Avenue. I've heard from businesses along it that they've seen what's happened to businesses along Grant with the road widening process. And they're concerned that they're going to be booted out and not get the sort of compensation and help that they need. And I'm not sure that we need to widen first at all. I'd like to know why we think we need to do that. So let's go forward. Let's include transit that includes a transportation plan that has affordable, convenient public transit options for bicycle transportation. We're a bicycle city. Let's make it safe for people to commute. And the needs of pedestrians so that they're feeling safe walking from their homes to their nearby businesses. That's my vision. Thank you.
So I want to just make sure that I'm understanding you, Mr. Dahl, with Mr. Padres said there could be, if it was just the same RTA as right now, he would say no. Is that correct, Mr. Padres? Okay. And then, but you're saying, are there any, Mr. Padres seemed to indicate that there were some conditions that could be met, that there could be a deal kind of worked out to, you know, my words, not his. You said that you would, it's time to fall on our sword. Are there any conditions that you would go along with the RTA, or is the proportional representation just, we either get proportional or nothing?
My point is that Tucson is the big player in this issue, and we need to act like the big player and ask and get what we need. And when one vote out of a bunch, we haven't gotten what we've need. We've become, you know, the source for funding, and even the projects within the city seem to serve people outside the city a little more than people inside the city. That's what I hear. We don't care if people get fast to the foothills. If it takes them 3 minutes longer, but we don't have to widen the road, great. Let's use that money for real transportation needs that we need right now, that we needed 10, 20 years ago. And that's repairing and maintaining neighborhood and feeder streets to proper standards. And let's do transportation planning that has these other elements. And if that could be accomplished, you know, the weighted voting, I think, is probably the most likely way for that to be accomplished. If we were promised everything, but I don't see how that could happen. I don't see how it could happen without the weighted voting.
Okay. Thank you for that clarification. Okay, so we have, let's see, a lot of people, a lot of people focus on transportation. So I'm just going. So we have a question about the, let's see, sorry, I'm scrolling and my screen is tiny. Yeah. I've seen drivers run red lights and drivers turning left onto pedestrians when the pedestrian has the green and the walk signal. This person was hit by a vehicle in a pedestrian right of way nearly 5 years ago, nearly died, and now uses a walker. I am so sorry that that happened. That is terrible. What would you do to improve traffic signals and drivers stopping at red lights, crosswalks, having a hawk signal at every crosswalk? What are your thoughts? And Kevin, you are up first. Mr. Dahl, excuse me.
Yeah, I don't think I have any specific proposals. I do like the hawk crossings as a frequent pedestrian, and safety is kind of a function of how much money we want to put into it, how much science we want to of traffic safety we want to put forth, and I think we should invest in safety. When I first moved into this neighborhood, I live just off Grant Road near Mountain. Getting cars back and forth on Grant Road, there was a suicide lane. The middle lane switched from east to west and west to east during the 2 commute times, and that was completely unsafe. We've made some progress, and I think there's more progress to be made. Simple things like synchronizing traffic lights. But again, I'm not an expert. As a city council person, I will respond to every incident that comes to me, and I will ask the traffic department, does this particular incident mean that we should do something different at this location? And I think over time, things will improve if we look at every single incident that way.
That, Mr. Potters.
I think we have more than enough incidents in the community to make a decision. We have a very high rate of pedestrian deaths in Ward 3 specifically, and all over the city. A lot of car crashes, a lot of accidents. My proposal on that is to increase enforcement with more motor police officers out on the street patrolling. The reason people run red lights, they do right turns, left turns when it's not their turn, it's because they know they're not going to get caught and there's not an officer in sight. I'm guilty of doing California stops and not really doing a full stop. Because odds are, I mean, you just take a little look around, there's not a police officer. So I think the solution is much stronger enforcement in our corridors, the arterials and the collector streets, especially on the busier times in the morning and in the evening, and everything in between. I mean, sometimes at night people think there's not an officer there, and that's where I was reading the statistics, and I believe it was published in the Daily Star that most accidents happen at nighttime because there's either an impaired pedestrian, or in most cases, but also the driver. And again, having impaired drivers, I think it's a derivative of not thinking, oh, I probably can make it home. I'm only 5 minutes away without being caught. So part of my plan in public safety, it's not just reducing violence, but it is making a much safer Tucson. And when I mean that, by the streets, I don't like people going 65 miles an hour down Fort Lowell or Country Club. It's ridiculous, and it's just going to lead to more deaths, which is completely unacceptable.
Thank you for that. I have, here's a question. Would you support putting solar panels over golf courses?
Sure, absolutely. Yes.
Probably Kevin, Mr. Dahl?
Yeah, I don't think the golfers would appreciate that, and the golf balls may break them, the solar things. There's lots of land in Tucson where solar panels are appropriate, and I think the biggest bang for the buck is parking lots, because you get shaded parking out of the deal. Golf courses are a question, and I suspect the question came from someone who doesn't like our investment in golf courses, and that's a whole nother thing. The amount of water resources we put into golf courses maybe is something we should look at. But
well, that is a follow-up question that I had on my list. So if you'd like to address that, the golf course issue as well, now that would be great.
Yeah, well, the city has a couple of golf courses, and I don't want to see us subsidize golfing as a recreational pursuit when it's But on the other hand, it's a recreational opportunity as long as they're carrying their weight. It's open space. It provides the breathing greenery for the city, and if that's paid for by golfers, that's great.
Would you increase the fees, or how do you make sure that that happens?
Well, I think for city residents who are paying taxes, the fee should always be reasonable. For people from outside of the city, there should be an additional fee.
Thank you. Mr. Padres.
First, I would like to clarify on the solar panels on golf courses. I did not believe it was on the actual fairway. I thought it would be on the parking lots or the restaurant. Or
Okay.
No, not on the fairway. I think it doesn't make sense, and they would break a ton of time. I think it'd be more expensive than that. I thought they meant parking lot solar panels.
Juan, it might be something to do. I'd pay a lot of money to play on that course.
So yeah, no, that's not what I was what I meant. But I do support solar panels on the golf course parking and different facilities. I worked for the city manager's office for 6 years with the team that was managed the golf courses, and it's not as simple as just eliminating golf courses. A lot of these are paid for through federal funding that was designed for parks. So you're either going to make a golf course or you're just going to make a really big park that's still going to require water. So from having worked for 6 years with a team that was in charge of that, the most unless you sell it flat out and then return some of the monies to the federal government, there's the best approach right now is to continue operating the golf courses. Now, it's not a new issue. Mayor and council have been facing this for decades. So I can guarantee you that most of the ideas have been exhausted at this point. However, I do believe that the way to make these golf courses more profitable, or at least pay for themselves, is not necessarily increasing the fees, but in many cases reduce the fees. I think one of the barriers to entry in golf is the expense. It's not a cheap sport to play. The equipment's expensive. It's paying, depending what time of year, the green fees, everything. So it's an expensive sport, and I think that's what keeps a lot of people away. But I think if you make it a little bit more accessible, you're going to have people from around the metro area coming to play in our public golf courses because of the expense, which in turn generates more revenue and keep things going that way. That's just my way of seeing it. I think if we make it more expensive for people outside of city limits to come, well, they're not going to come. There's alternatives. We don't have the only golf courses in the metro area.
Okay, so we are coming up on our hour. I have a question from the participants. Right now, Suntran bus fares are free because of the COVID protocols. How would you move forward with fares? Previously, a one-way fare was $1.75, which is $3.50. I'm a journalist, but my math is not that bad. $3.50 for a single trip is very expensive for anyone, and certainly not an incentive to ride the bus. What are your thoughts on bus fares? When do they go back to being charged? Should they be free on weekends? What are your thoughts on how to price and incentivize people riding the bus? Mr. Padres?
Thank you. I don't think I can discuss the actual fee, but I'll talk about the general idea. I don't think the bus system should continue to be perpetually free. I think there should be some fee, an affordable fee. It shouldn't be an expensive fee. It should be accessible to the general public. And for those who are below the poverty rate or in a distress situation, which already exists, there should be a reduced rate, or on whether it's a monthly pass or fee. So I do believe in going back to that. I think we not only need to generate the revenue, but I think transportation is one of the most expensive things, and it takes some of the most of the city budget. So I do believe we need to recover some of it, and you need to have a little bit of skin in the game. I don't think just being completely free is that beneficial. I think there needs to be some cost related to it, as it is for all of us. And in turn, it really helps improve the bus system, maybe even include Wi-Fi or make it a third decade of the 21st century system. Those are my thoughts.
Thank you. Mr. Dahl.
Yeah, I think it's great that the buses are currently free, and I would like to see that continue. The fares taken on the buses just pay a small fraction of the cost of the buses. And this sort of public transit should be subsidized. So let's make it free and easy and accessible for people who need to take it and for people who would like to take it. We subsidize roads. When was the last time you paid a toll for driving across town? So why don't we subsidize a form of transit that we want to encourage people to use more than roads? So I'm for keeping the buses free.
Don't the buses need the roads also?
They do. That's a good point.
Okay, a question I have, and then we will go for our brief closing statements. The city of Tucson voted to allocate $1 million for early childhood education, joining the county with their $10 million investment. So my question is, going forward, what should the city increase its allocation, its participation to fund scholarships for low-income families to send their 3- and 4-year-olds to high-quality preschool? Is the $1 million enough? What are your thoughts on that, Mr. Dahl?
I don't think I know enough about that at this point, since it sounds like it makes sense, and education is important. We know that early childhood education stops a lot of problems and helps children from families that are disadvantaged catch up with children from families that are more advantaged. So it sounds like it makes sense, but I don't know enough about it. If it's a new program, I would like to see how it's working and what the metrics are.
Mr. Padres?
As many of you know, I ran for county supervisor last year successfully, and my signature issue was funding for quality early childhood education, which I'm very happy to see the county moving in that direction with $10 million and the city providing the additional $1 million. The reality is it's $1 million is a drop in the bucket, and so is the 10, but it's a great start. I think it really puts the focus on where we should be going. I have faith that the Biden administration will be providing additional funds. I think it's a top priority, and we're going to see more of that. I think quality early childhood education is a must, no questions asked. I come from a family of teachers and have friends who are teachers, and they all say that's where it starts. And if kids start behind, by the time they get to kindergarten, they're already behind. Odds are they're going to be behind by the time they're in the 3rd grade. They're not going to be reading at 3rd grade levels, which, as many of you already know, prison capacity is planned at 3rd grade reading level score. So I think the city can, if we can do more, and I think you can do more, if we don't get the federal funding, or even if the state legislature, I'm hoping we can turn state blue in the next election and maybe have some state funding on that. But I mean, that's being an optimist. But in the worst case scenario, if that doesn't happen, I think the city can look into providing additional resources, because that quality early childhood education is an economic development issue. It's a public health issue. It really does affect every aspect of life. If our kids are not properly prepared, we will not have the workforce in our community to attract the proper investment or the proper job. So whatever that number may be that needs to be, I think we should start working both with the county to start filling that bucket. Where are we going to get the revenues of that? I mean, I've heard different propositions through property tax or even the marijuana sales tax. I mean, there's a lot that can go into that. So I'm a big proponent, and should I be in the city council, I will fight for that every day. Thank you.
So we have, let's do a minute closing each. And I want to thank everyone for joining us. And the video, the question was, will this be posted? Yes, it is going to be posted at tucson.com/opinion. You can find it there. And so if I remember right, I think Mr. Dahl, you are up for our closing. I try to alternate and sometimes I mess up. But I think that you are up first for our closing statement of about a minute.
Well, thank you, Sarah and Arizona Daily Star. This has been a great forum. I think we've hit the most important issues in the ward. I promise to tackle these issues with the skills and talents that I've gained as a leader in the conservation world over the last few decades of hard work, research, bringing everybody to the table, trying to find some common ground. You can find out more about me and the many leaders who have endorsed my campaign. I'm endorsed by the current city councilwoman and others. My website is Kevin Dahl, 4, Tucson.com. Thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much. Mr. Padres.
Thank you also once again to the Arizona Daily Star for putting this forum, and thank you to the people of Tucson for joining us and giving us your time to hear our propositions. I would like to leave you with this. I have a very diverse background in the public sector, in the private sector, as an entrepreneur, as president of a nonprofit. I'm not new to this. I have the experience, I have the energy, and I have the passion to do a great job for Tucson. And I'm respectfully asking for your vote and your support come this election in August 3rd. I think we can get the job done. And I really, really hope that you will give me your vote. If you need more information, votepadres.com is my website. Again, that's Vote Padres, Padres like the team. And I appreciate your support. Thank you very much, Tucson.
Thank you so much. So please, if you're interested in Ward 6, that will be Friday at 11. And we will see you then. Thank you so much.